sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, so listen to this. The Supreme Court just made this big ruling, and it's about almost $2 billion in USAID funding that was frozen.
Yeah.
We're talking like a ton of money here for projects all over the world.
Right.
So think of this like your deep dive briefing, all right?
Right.
We're going to be going through this Supreme Court decision and also a bunch of news articles to kind of figure out what this whole USA freeze is about.
Right.
Why people are freaking out about it, and also like what it could mean for how the U.S., does foreign aid going forward.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me about this is it shows, that tension between different parts of the government. Like the executive branch kind of showing its power, and then like the courts pushing back.
Yeah.
And you have billions of dollars of, aid that's kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get into all that legal stuff, I want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're talking about.
Okay.
So USAA, probably everyone listening knows the basics, but I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of projects are we actually talking about here?
Right.
Is it just like sending boxes of food overseas, or is it more complicated than that?
Oh, it's way more than just boxes of food.
Right.
I mean, that is a big part of it.
Okay.
But think about USA as like this really diverse toolbox for dealing with like all these global challenges.
Okay.
They're involved in everything from like disaster relief and helping refugees to like, boosting the economies of developing countries and making their government stronger and more democratic. They even work on like worldwide health problems, like fighting HIV and AIDS and malaria.
So it's not just about reacting to like crises when they pop up. It's also about trying to like build a more stable world that's better off for everyone, right? Which makes this funding freeze even more worrying.
Yeah.
Like $2 billion is a huge amount of money.
It's a lot.
How did this whole thing even get started?
Well, back when Trump was president, there was this big push to cut back on spending by the government. They were looking for what they thought was wasted money.
Okay.
And, foreign aid was one of the main targets.
Yeah.
The Trump administration basically stopped payments for a lot of these USAID projects.
Okay.
They said it was all about being more efficient.
Okay.
And making sure that, taxpayers' money was being used well.
Right.
But,
didn't that cause like a huge backlash?
Absolutely did.
Like people were really upset that the U.S. was breaking its promises, right?
Especially the groups that were actually doing the work on the ground for USAA.
Yeah.
They had already done the work. They'd already delivered the aid.
Right.
And then suddenly the money stopped coming.
Wow.
It's not surprising that they decided to sue.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a classic standoff, right?
Right.
The executive branch is saying, we're in charge here.
Yeah.
And then the courts are saying, hold on, there are rules you got to follow. So what happened next?
So a judge in a lower court, and this is really interesting.
Okay.
This judge was appointed by Biden.
Okay.
Actually sided with the aid groups.
Wow.
And said the Trump administration had to pay up.
Okay.
And they even set a deadline, February 26th.
Oh, man, that must have really made things worse.
It definitely added fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
The Trump administration went into like full defense mode.
Okay.
They said the deadline was impossible. They said the judge didn't have the power to do that.
Okay.
And basically said, we're taking this to the Supreme Court.
So it was like high drama in Washington.
It was a big deal.
So when it finally got to the Supreme Court, what happened?
So the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, basically said, sorry, the deadline's passed. You got to figure out how to pay these groups.
Wow.
It was a win for the aid groups. But that vote, 5-4, that was close.
Yeah, that's really close.
That tells you how intense this was.
Especially when you think about how much some of the justices disagreed with the decision.
Right.
Like one of the sources we read mentioned that Justice Alito actually used the word stunned in his dissenting opinion.
Yeah, he was really worried about the ruling.
Yeah.
He thought it gave too much power to just one judge to force the government to pay such a huge amount of money.
Right.
He thought it was a dangerous precedent.
It's one thing to talk about these legal battles and billions of dollars.
Right.
But I'm really interested in like the human side of all this.
Yeah.
What does this funding freeze actually mean for the people that USAID is supposed to be helping?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have to go beyond just the legal arguments and look at what's happening in the real world.
Yeah.
And those consequences can be really bad.
Okay.
Think about that food aid delivery to a camp for displaced people in Ethiopia.
Right.
That was mentioned in one of the articles. Those deliveries stopped because of this political fight happening thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
That's the real impact of this funding freeze.
That's heartbreaking. And I bet those aren't the only projects that have been affected.
Right.
What else are we talking about here? Like healthcare, education, clean water projects?
All of that.
What else has been put on hold because of this whole mess?
It's a lot.
It's kind of crazy to think about all the people whose lives are on hold because of this political mess. And what about the people actually working at USAID?
Right.
They must be so frustrated, right?
Absolutely. Imagine spending your whole career trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And then your work gets stopped and you don't even know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
All because of these funding cuts. It's got to be really demoralizing.
It sounds like the articles we read painted a pretty depressing picture of what's going on inside USAID.
Yeah.
People talking about maybe losing their jobs, projects being put on hold indefinitely.
Right.
Just a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. A lot of anxiety.
So it's not just people around the world who are being affected, but the people trying to help are also feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
What a mess. I also read that some experienced people are leaving USA because of all this chaos.
Yeah. That's a big concern, this brain drain that's happening at USAID.
Okay.
One article talked about how the way the Trump administration handled things, all the uncertainty they created led to a lot of experienced professionals leaving or being pushed aside.
Okay.
And that loss of expertise could have a lasting impact on USAID.
Yeah.
Even if they get the funding back eventually.
It's like trying to rebuild a house after a fire, but losing all the blueprints and your best builders.
That's a great analogy.
You might eventually get something standing, but it won't be the same.
Exactly. And this isn't just happening at USAID, unfortunately. We're seeing this worrisome trend around the world.
Okay.
Attacks on government institutions and experts, often driven by misinformation and political polarization.
It's like people have forgotten how important experience and knowledge are.
Yeah.
Instead of listening to people who have spent their whole lives trying to understand these complicated problems,
Right.
we get stuck in these echo chambers where facts don't matter.
And that's really dangerous, especially when we're talking about global challenges like poverty, disease, climate change.
Yeah.
These problems need solutions that are based on evidence,
Right.
not just gut feelings or ideology.
So we've got this legal battle, the funding freeze, potential job losses, this brain drain at USA, and this broader issue of people not trusting experts and institutions.
Right.
It's a lot to think about, and honestly, it's a little discouraging.
It is a challenging situation.
Is there any hope here? Any reason to be optimistic?
No, I think there's always hope.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court ruling itself offers a little bit of optimism.
How so?
It reaffirms the importance of upholding contracts and honoring commitments.
Yeah.
It sends a message that even when things are politically chaotic, the rule of law still matters.
So at least there's some accountability there. But what about the bigger picture?
Right.
The Biden administration has talked about restoring U.S. global leadership. But can they really fix all the damage that's been done?
It won't be easy.
Okay.
Repairing the damage to USAID's morale and expertise and reputation will take time and effort.
Yeah.
And don't forget, there's still a lot of people who are against foreign aid.
Yeah.
Both in the U.S. and internationally.
So even if there's a renewed commitment to foreign aid, there are still big obstacles to overcome.
Absolutely. One of the biggest is how the public sees foreign aid.
Okay.
If we want people to support foreign aid consistently, we have to do a better job of explaining why it's important.
Yeah.
We need to highlight the tangible benefits.
Okay.
Not just in terms of humanitarian assistance, but also in terms of global stability, economic growth, and ultimately U.S. national security.
It's like if you're asking someone to invest in something.
Right.
You got to show them what they'll get out of it.
Exactly.
You can't just say, trust me, it's a good idea.
You got to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Show people how their tax dollars are actually making a difference in the world and how that contributes to a safer and more prosperous future for everyone.
So it all comes down to education and communication.
In a nutshell, yes.
Okay.
We need to have honest, open conversations about foreign aid.
Yeah.
And move past these simplistic us versus them narratives.
Right.
We live in a world where everything's connected. What happens in one part of the world can affect us all.
It's like when you throw a pebble into a pond.
Right.
It creates those ripples that spread out.
What a great way to put it.
That's what our actions or inactions can do on a global scale.
We need to be aware of those ripples.
Yeah.
And understand that because we're all connected, working together to solve global problems, isn't just about being nice. It's in our own self-interest.
So while this whole U.S. aid situation is worrying, it's also a wake-up call, maybe even a chance to rethink our priorities and how we engage with the world in a more thoughtful and strategic way.
Exactly. It's a chance to rebuild trust in the institutions we need to tackle global challenges.
Yeah.
And to have a broader, more nuanced conversation about America's role in the world.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, haven't we?
Right.
From the legal fight over USAID funding to the impact on U.S. foreign policy and the importance of experts in making decisions.
Yeah.
But there's one more crucial piece of this puzzle.
Well, yeah.
What happens when the U.S. steps back from being a global leader?
Right.
Especially when it comes to foreign aid.
Yeah.
Who fills that void, and what does it mean for the balance of power in the world?
Big questions.
We'll explore those questions in part 3. So we've been talking about this USAID funding freeze and, the legal battles.
Right.
And what it means for the people on the ground and even the people working at USAID.
But zooming out even further, I think there's this bigger question.
Okay.
What happens when the U.S. steps back from being a global leader?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to foreign aid.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that worries a lot of people.
Okay. Why is that?
Because when there's a power vacuum like that, it doesn't stay empty for long.
Okay.
Other countries are ready to jump in, and they might not have the same goals as the U.S.
So it's not just about the money itself.
Right.
It's about who's controlling it.
Yeah.
And what they're trying to do with it.
Exactly. And one of the biggest players looking to fill that void is China.
Okay.
They've been expanding their influence all over the world through investments in infrastructure and trade deals.
Yeah.
And even foreign aid.
And they're thinking long term, right?
Absolutely. They're using their economic power to change the global landscape.
Okay, so let's talk about China's approach to foreign aid.
Okay. One of the sources we read used the phrase, no strings attached. What does that actually mean?
Okay.
Does China just give away money with no expectations?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
They're definitely strategic about where they invest their money.
Right.
But it's true that China is often willing to fund projects in countries that the U.S. might not want to work with.
Okay.
Places with bad human rights records or corrupt governments.
So they don't really care about things like democratic values or human rights?
Not as much as the U.S., and that's what makes this so interesting.
Okay.
And maybe a little bit worrying.
Yeah.
By offering aid and investment without demanding political reforms or making countries follow certain standards.
Right.
China can build relationships and gain leverage in parts of the world where the U.S. might hesitate to get involved.
It's like they're playing by a different set of rules.
Right.
And some countries might actually prefer that.
Yeah, especially if they feel like the U.S. is always lecturing them or attaching too many conditions to its aid.
And that's where the strategic implications really come in, right?
Exactly. China's approach lets them make alliances and secure access to resources in important regions of the world, which could shift the balance of power in their favor.
So if the U.S. steps back, it's not just about losing influence.
Right.
It's about creating opportunities for rivals like China to come in and change the world order.
That's a key point, and it raises some serious questions about the future of democracy and human rights.
Yeah.
If China becomes the main provider of development assistance, it could change the norms and values that guide international relations.
Right.
It's not a guaranteed outcome, but it's something we should definitely be thinking about.
It's a pretty sobering thought. But before we get too pessimistic, is there another side to this story?
Sure.
Are there any potential benefits to the U.S. stepping back?
Okay.
Or at least rethinking its role?
Well, not everyone sees the U.S. retreat as a bad thing. Some people argue that the U.S. has been doing too much for too long when it comes to global development and security.
Okay.
They say it's time for other countries, especially rich ones,
right,
to step up and do more.
So it's not about abandoning foreign aid completely,
right,
but more about a rebalancing, encouraging other countries to share the responsibility.
Exactly. And we're already seeing some of that happening.
Really?
European Union, for example, has been increasing its foreign aid budget.
Okay.
There's this growing understanding that global challenges need everyone to work together.
Yeah.
And for a more balanced approach.
So maybe this shift in the global landscape doesn't have to be a win-lose situation.
Right.
Maybe it's an opportunity to create a more multilateral system.
Yeah.
Where more countries have a say, and more countries are actively involved in finding solutions.
That's definitely a possibility, but it'll require a lot of diplomacy, open communication, and a willingness to work with a lot of different partners.
Right.
Even the ones we don't always agree with.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
The legal fight, the impact on USAID, the human stories, and the bigger geopolitical implications.
Yeah, it's clear that this USAID funding freeze. It's not just an isolated event. It's part of this much bigger conversation about America's role in the world and how we engage with the rest of the planet.
And that's what I really hope our listeners take away from this.
Me too.
The future of U.S. foreign policy and really the future of global governance.
It's not predetermined. It's something we're all shaping through our choices, our actions, and how we engage with the world.
So to everyone listening out there, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Absolutely.
The world needs your voice and your perspective.
It does.
This has been a deep dive into the USAID funding freeze.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.